like I do them every month.
And we are live.
All right. The chair calls to order the November 29th meeting of the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission. Welcome back, commissioners and staff. Thank you for your attendance today. In your materials, that page provided, you have the agenda for today's meeting and the minutes from our prior meeting on October 25th. If everyone has had an opportunity to review, does anyone have any comments, any corrections that need to be made to either?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we adopt the agenda and the minutes with the correction in several penalty waivers. And well, I had began the meeting because the chairman and vice chairman were absent. The vice chairman came back, I think, after the word report on the third paragraph, civil penalty paragraph on page 1.
Okay.
And it should show that Mr. Helmer arrived and Mr. Solbach turned the meeting over to him. If that's in the minutes. Other than that, I would, it looks okay.
No. Is there anything else?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Jerry. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the motion with the correction noted by Commissioner Solbach, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The motion passes. Turning to today's agenda, we will begin with an executive director's report.
So the first thing that we do in the director's report, it's the November meeting. So we've got the annual report. At the end of the presentation of the annual report, obviously I can take any questions throughout or any discussion, anything people want to do. At the very, very end, whenever we're done talking, I'm going to ask that the commission take a vote to approve the annual report, since we are obligated by statute to provide an annual report to the governor and the legislature. When we make that motion, I'll ask that you also allow me to make technical adjustments because, for example, the table of contents page numbers are still wrong. So little things like that. However, I'm going to go through the annual report and just cover some highlights. This is going to be very similar to the kind of presentation I do for the legislature. They usually both the Senate and the House typically want to hear the annual report. So this is normally part of the legislative presentation as well. I'll start on page 2 just to very briefly note that during fiscal year 2023, which is from July of 2022 through June of 2023, we held 8 regular meetings and 2 special settings. A little bit lower on us for meetings. We had a couple meetings get canceled for kind of odd reasons, and we had one special setting for a budget at one point and one special setting for a separate issue entirely. That was just an executive session. So, but otherwise pretty normal that we have usually about somewhere between 8 to 10 meetings a year. You obviously have your commissioners, all of you, on page 3. If there's anything about the way that is written that you believe is incorrect or you would like corrected, you can tell me and I would be happy to make any changes. That is how it is currently written. On page 4, this is a great opportunity. I want to make sure to thank my staff for everything that they do all year round. The amount of effort and work that they put in day to day to make sure that the laws are adequately followed to help people try to comply with the campaign finance, lobbying, and ethics laws. I cannot thank them enough for everything that they do. I'm very lucky to have the team here that we have at the Ethics Commission. At the bottom of page 4, you have the budget. We were originally approved in fiscal 23 for $751,000. We used $722,000 of that, which is pretty normal. So we were able to stay under budget by a pretty good amount, but we aren't wildly off target. On page 5, we discuss legislative activity, and we'll note that the only legislative activity last year really was House substitute for SB 208. We've talked about it at length. I did include a bulleted itemization of everything or all the large things that changed in that bill on page 5, but I won't belabor the points. We've talked about it multiple times in our meetings at this point. On page 7, I made 7 presentations this year. That's about on target. We're trying to focus towards, almost all of these are trainings in some way or another. I actually am going to be on 2 panels for the conference on governmental ethics laws here coming up in just in 2 weeks. And Caitlin will also be attending with me because it's in Kansas City. So I'm definitely excited about the opportunity to make a couple presentations to other ethics officials in other states. For advisory opinions, this was a very odd year. We actually had no advisory opinions at all in fiscal year 23. No one requested one, and we didn't have any reason to issue one on our own behalf. Historically, we've issued 1,261 advisory opinions, but we didn't have any in 23. I anticipate that will change in 24. For the review and audit program, we usually talk here a lot about campaign finance first. There were just under 3,000 reports that were filed in fiscal year 23. This processed 20 statewide candidates, 254 House candidates, 311 county candidates, 245 first-class city candidates, and 438 party and political action committees. That is, none of this is out of line with the normal expectations either. There were 20 candidates who ran for statewide offices, and all of the 5 races were contested. There were 254 House candidates who ran for office. There were 70 contested and 55 uncontested races. That's a reduction in contested elections. In 2020, 94 general election races were contested, just as a comparison. As a discussion of audits, there are really 4 things that can trigger an audit from our office. The first is a formal complaint that requires an audit as part of an investigation. The next is when we have to clarify a problem that is identified during a desk review. So while every one of these reports, all 3,000 of those reports, receives a line-by-line review for compliance, and if there is something that sticks out as necessary to trigger an audit, that is something that can result in an audit as well. Third, it's possible that we do a random sampling of candidates and committees to do an audit. If a candidate is selected for a random audit, everyone who competed in that election is also audited as well. We haven't done a random audit in a little while. I do think that random audits are important to the mission of ensuring campaign finance laws are followed adequately. The long-term goal of the commission is to eventually get back to some random audits. The last audit is the one that is actually most common for us in more recent years. Is a voluntary audit where a candidate simply has no ability to identify some discrepancy in their report. Something is going on. They can't figure out what the problem is. They want to terminate or they want to move on. And they've done everything they can. They ask us to essentially do a voluntary audit to help them identify the problem. In fiscal year 23, we conducted 4 campaign finance audits. On page 9, you'll see the breakdown of those statistics. The few things worth noting here is that of the 3,000 reports that were filed, 218 of those reports resulted in a failure to file notice. Failure to files can also come about from amended reports. So it's not you're not saying that 9% of all reports received a failure to file, but 218 failure to file notices were sent. 407 reports required further amendments. They had some sort of error or omission. On page 10, all of you are familiar with filing a statement of substantial interest since you've all had to do it as a board member. There were just shy of 6,000 statements of substantial interest that were filed. You'll see the breakdown of the categories of people who file those SSIs there as well.
I just note on page 10, you have a statement in here that the commission has found that the conflict statutes are not widely understood. Where did we find that?
That is, so that language has been in the annual report for a while. It's a notice that when we provide in trainings about state ethics laws, it is not uncommon that people are surprised by, oh, well, I accepted this speaker's gift. I accepted a mug when I went to go speak at some event. Or more commonly, we actually see the other side where someone will call up and say, for example, person A seems to be doing something that is affecting their financial interests, but it's not actually illegal because there's no contractual relationship of any kind that's underlying the problem. So there's something that might feel unethical, but is not actually illegal. We see both of those scenarios arise, and we're really trying to work in both directions to ensure that we're encompassing all of those when we do trainings. But in order to help resolve the situation, I'm trying to work towards electronic training that will essentially reach all state employees. Once we have electronic training all rolled out, I would hope that the state would consider, I know a lot of agencies may do this voluntarily anyway, but there are many states that require ethics training for state employees. And I don't think that would be necessarily a bad way to go, but that's years down the road for us, for sure.
I appreciate that, and that all sounds good. But is this a report? I know it's by statute that it comes from the commission.
Correct.
But I'm unaware that the commission, as far as us as a commission, have made this as a finding.
I can
So-
say the director believes if you're.
Or staff or something of
Sure,
that nature.
Just the director has found.
Yeah, I'm happy to make that adjustment.
And
It's possible the commission may have made that finding, but this language has been in the annual report for longer than I've been here.
I
So
hear you.
that is definitely something that, and every year I look at it and make certain adjustments here and there. But you're absolutely right. That is something that, if that is something that was found, it's something that, it's a,
And speaking of finding, I didn't find this in our packet. Did it get in it?
yeah, it is in the packet.
Yeah.
Was it in
It
this
just
morning?
got added this morning.
Yes.
Okay. So at 7:30, I didn't see it.
It got added,
After.
yeah.
Okay, okay.
I've been out for the last 2 days, unfortunately.
So do I need to sit closer to John?
I'm told I'm fine now, so.
I'm all right with that, John.
Okay, good enough.
Just don't slide around and get close to me.
On page 11, you have what I think is the area of the ethics laws that come up least commonly, but also has the least understanding in the general public about what this is. State employees who represent someone before a state agency where they receive compensation for it, unless it's part of their regular state employment, they're required to file a representation case disclosure. Also, if a legislator or a legislator's firm contracts to perform a service for a state agency, they have to file the same disclosure statement quarterly. None of those were filed in fiscal year 23. It's possible that no one has engaged in that activity. It is fairly rare, but it's also possible that because there's no way to know who needs to file those statements on our side, because there's no mandatory disclosure of a state agency reaching out to us and saying, is there something that we need to do with this legislator's firm?
I filed a number of those when I was in the legislature.
Yeah, they used to be much more common to be filed. That is definitely true. For lobbying, there were 619 lobbyists registered in 23, representing 1,918 organizations. I've got a 10-year analysis at the end of the report I'll talk about later. But in total, that's $807,000 that has been spent on lobbying activities so far, and there's still one more report covering the last few months of the year still to come. And so far we've had 5,300 lobbyist expenditure reports, with only 77 failure to file notices issued, which is less than 1.5%. On page 12, for inquiries and investigations, we had 4 investigations that began prior to fiscal year 23, 3 of which are ongoing. In fiscal year 23, 7 new investigations were opened, and all 7 of them are closed. Our investigator Scott is handling them all very efficiently, and we appreciate that. For complaints, there were 18 complaints filed in fiscal 23. Most of those complaints are filed due to very late reports. That's usually what happens. 11 complaints were dismissed prior to a finding of probable cause. No complaints had a public hearing, and 7 complaints are ongoing. For civil penalties, we assessed $55,000 in civil penalties and waived 12,600 civil penalties in fiscal year 23. We also collected about 12,600 in civil penalties, some of which included amounts that were assessed prior to fiscal 23. We did not assess any civil fines in this fiscal year, but we did collect $4,000 from civil fines assessed in previous years. You'll see that box at the bottom of 13 that breaks out those penalties as well by campaign finance, lobbying, and SSIs. You'll see that pursuant to our normal practice, we don't normally assess very many civil penalties for statements of substantial interest, just because we're very forgiving. We understand that there are lots of failure points on SSI filing, and we work very hard to make sure that we resolve any issues that are outstanding before they reach a civil penalty scenario. I can stop at this point for questions before we get into the legislative recommendations. These are unchanged from the last meeting, but now might be a good time if there are any questions.
I have
Seeing
a
none.
correction.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, so on page 2, my, I don't know, residence is listed as Topeka. I'm not sure where that came from. So if you could change that to my permanent address in Prairie Village.
Yes. Got it. We'll make that correction. All right,
Any
seeing
other
nothing
questions?
else.
Go ahead.
Legislative recommendations, I'm going to be, I won't go into them with the depth that we had at the last meeting, but I know we only had a few, we had many people who were not able to attend the last meeting. So I won't skip it entirely, but I'll just go into it with a little bit of depth. The first is electronic filing. We've been advocating for this for years. Nothing has changed on this recommendation. We won't legislatively advance this year because we've been told by essentially that it isn't going to go anywhere this year by people who would know in the legislature. The ethics cleanup mega bill is number 2. None of these issues are really things that we anticipate as concerning in any way. They're not things that I think anyone would have any problem with. They're all things that are fixing things in statute or correcting some conflicts. There's nothing in here that is a policy change on number 2. Number 3 is support of federal candidates. Right now, the Campaign Finance Act has a strict prohibition on using anything under the Campaign Finance Act to in or for the campaign of a candidate for federal elective office. This means that a central committee, for example, cannot go buy Biden, Trump, DeSantis, Haley signs. They can't do that. It's not legal. At least not with their central committee money. We don't really see an anti-corruption benefit. This is the language we used last year in the annual report. The commission did not see an anti-corruption benefit to prohibiting state party committees, county party committees, and PACs from engaging in that activity. And so the recommendation would allow party committees and PACs to have that activity if they want. If there are issues with the FEC, then that's the jurisdiction of the FEC, not us. So I don't see much of a benefit to have that prohibition. And we have had a lot of issues where often a central committee has run into difficulty where they inadvertently violated this and they've had to walk it back, which is not easy to do the way the law is written. Number 4 is required campaign account termination. Right now, there is nothing under the act that requires a campaign account to ever be closed. As long as the candidate continues to file annual January reports, but otherwise they don't do anything at all unless they want to close it. Right now, there are campaign accounts that are over 32 years old and 44 accounts are over 10 years old. Allowing these to stay open creates some problems. There's an auditing nightmare where if they ever do want to terminate or if they ever want to square their books, if there's a discrepancy, the banks simply will not have those records that go back far enough, which almost obligates a fine at that point, which no one wants to be in that position. It also allows a lot of avenues for someone to illegally use an account for personal benefit since there's very little oversight over that. We also can't contact the account holder because they're not going to update their appointments of treasurer very often when they're 30-year-old accounts. And this particular recommendation, the way it's written, would require zeroing them out and closing the account within 6 years after the end of their most recent term of office or the last cycle in which they were a candidate. The 6 years is a bit more generous than what we've seen in Missouri and Oklahoma. Missouri requires closure of accounts within 30 days, which seems very quick to me and that doesn't really work with how Kansas accounts typically work. People will sometimes keep them open to run for office in another cycle. Oklahoma has something that kind of recognizes that as well. They require them to be closed within 2 years if the office is a 2-year term, 4 years if the office has a 4-year term, or 6 years if the office has a 6-year term. So this recommendation would just be 6 years, which is the largest that Oklahoma would have. The last recommendation is essentially make PACs and party committees responsible for report filing. We had this discussion in a fine hearing. This formalizes the recommendation. Both candidates and treasurers are legally responsible for ensuring their report is filed properly, but do what we think is probably due to a drafting oversight. Only treasurers are responsible for the filing of PAC and party reports. This means that there are lots of situations where treasurers are the only people that we can hold responsible for it, and sometimes those treasurers may not be the primary person who caused a violation to occur. This recommendation would essentially allow PACs and parties and sometimes candidates to, it would have the same responsibility for PACs and party committees that PACs do. So the chair would be responsible as well, in addition to the treasurer. The last thing on the annual report is at the is Appendix 1, the 10-year analysis of lobbying expenditures from 2013 to 2023. So a couple things that I'll note is that the number of lobbyists has gone up rather dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. We've had 75 more lobbyists in the last just a few years. We've had 400 more entities be represented in 2023 than were represented in 2019. It's a pretty dramatic shift. And while there were some increases before that, they weren't so consistent as this. And we've seen this increase go up each year, which is just interesting to know. I don't have a reason for why that's happening, but it could be because more lobbyists are registering for executive branch lobbying, since that only became regulated a few years ago. But that's not my experience, is that I don't see a lot of that. I'll note also that on the total expenditures, 2021 still obviously stands out as a odd year, that only $448,000 was spent on lobbying expenses. That's because of COVID. No, there weren't nearly as many lobbying expenses, not as many events, not as much food and drink. However, 2023 is back to a return to what we normally see, is that between $750,000 to $1 million, which is pretty normal for Kansas. So even though the number of lobbyists and represented entities has gone up, the amount that is expended has not dramatically increased. I can take any questions about the annual report, or I would seek a motion to approve the report with the changes as noted, as well as any technical changes as needed.
Like my other question, I notice in the statute talks about the commission making recommendations.
Yes.
On statutory issues. As I mentioned last month, these are not things that I'm in a position to vote in favor of. So is there a way that we could, is it permissible to say this is what staff and the director suggest as opposed to the commission as a whole?
I mean, I can look at the statute to see.
It says commission.
Yeah, that was what I guessed, that it would just say the commission. Typically, that's when the commission is referenced, it usually is referencing all of you, the body.
The office.
I don't know the repercussions of all of these, so before I can put my stamp on recommending it as a change. And there's some things in here that talk about social media, and I think, you know, from the little bit that I've seen from your legislative presentations, that's a giant quagmire of unknowns. So I mean, that in and of itself gives me pause.
Sure, well, I can answer any questions for sure. And this is part of why I presented in October as well. So people have an opportunity to come to terms with any issues. If there are things that need to get adjusted, moved, deleted, etc., we can do that. For social media, this actually is a fix to the law. It's 2C. This is something that.
Well, I accept what you say, but I'm not in a position to put my name behind it as understanding it or necessarily agreeing to it. So I can accept that as your recommendation. But I don't want the legislature to think that I've thought this through and understand what it all means so as to be my recommendation.
Okay, can I explain that one issue? I know that you probably have others, but I can explain that one.
Sure.
So right now, the paid for attribution by law on electronic communication has to appear at the end of a communication. On social media sites, Instagram, especially Facebook, is particularly bad about that. The end of a communication doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. And whether or not having it on one post means that it's adequate for another post is not great. So this essentially is eliminating the at the end of requirement and making it clear and conspicuous, which is the FEC language that they use for adoption, which prevents that issue entirely. It just has to appear somewhere on the page, essentially, that is somewhere people can read it. That's the issue that this is intending to address. We view it, that's why it's been viewed as a cleanup item rather than a policy change, because it actually makes things easier to comply with, not harder. It's nothing that makes anything more stringent.
It seems like when we've had those kinds of violations, it's been dealing with Facebook and just the manner in which Facebook works. So this to me seems a practical solution, and hopefully we will face less and candidates and have less angst.
But what I hear Chris saying is that as a general rule of all matters, he just doesn't feel that his position is that he could support those and would not wish to have his name associated with a blanket statement that the commission is recommending this, am I correct?
That's fair. I mean, the commission certainly can, if it goes by a majority, so.
And in that process, Chris, perhaps we could simply see if there's a motion to approve, and if there's a vote on the table, we could record the yeas and the nays, and with exception, yours could be the exception, and you would be protected. And if anyone inquires, I did not support that because what the commission majority did, and that's how it went.
I think that's generally how it works.
Yeah.
I would move that we adopt the annual report, subject to technical corrections if the executive director finds are necessary, and with Mr. Berger noted minutes as not is not voting.
Great.
I would not speak for Mr. Berman myself.
Well, thank you, John. Do I have a second?
Okay, well, I'll amend my motion without that statement.
But does it also include the change about the commission finding?
Yes, yeah.
Noted. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Yes. Who made that second? Judge.
You know,
Got it. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the motion as qualified to approve as qualified by Commissioner Solbach, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed
Aye.
say nay.
Nay.
Noted.
you vote nay, or do you want to just not vote?
Vote nay.
Okay, you want to be recorded?
Vote nay, and I believe, was that Commissioner Schonifer also voted nay?
Yeah, that's correct.
Noted. The motion, it passes. Thank you, Director Skoglund. Returning to the agenda, the next item we have is a civil fine hearing proposal with statutory authority.
Yeah,
What
if
was
you'll,
the-
the second part of the director's report, if you'll give me just one moment though. I do want to make sure the historical practice of the commission and the way that I've always done it since 2017 is when we deal with the annual report, the item that is most discussed is legislative recommendations. I provide those a month in advance for people to discuss, communicate, determine if there's any issues with them. Do we want to have those provided even further in advance? I mean, how can I address I'm just concerned because I want to make sure that I am addressing the concern that I hear two commissioners voicing with their votes here. I want to make sure that I am addressing what you are concerned about. And I don't know how to do that with what I've been told so far.
Well, as I mentioned last month, it has to do with my lack of fluency in all the statutes and how they fit together. So in that sense, there's nothing you can do until time passes and I grow more in understanding how it all fits together and can actually provide a meaningful eye to a vote. But I would say a month in advance is nice. Maybe a little more would be good.
Sure, I can do that.
I mean, anytime you change the legislation, that should be a big deal.
I will say we've gotten in since 2017, I think we've gotten one of our legislative recommendations ever voted by any chamber. And it was e-filing and it was voted overwhelmingly by the House. And then the Senate told us they wouldn't take it up. So
Maybe we're doing it wrong.
I mean,
Maybe we need a lobby.
Anyone know a lobbyist or 619 of them?
Find one.
So anyway, okay, we can definitely work on that. Next year, I'll make sure that we're providing them even further in advance, just to try to make sure that we can have a little more direct conversation then as well, to kind of get at some of those issues as well.
And I would say, Chairman Berger, that yes, the longer you're around this board, the more you will see more of these things come up. And these are just fixes that we'd like to have for clarity for the people who are running for elected office and those who are helping them. So it's
most recommendations arise from something happening.
Yeah.
That we are trying to.
Yes. And these are minor compared to some of them.
Yeah, we have pretty light hand this year with the ones we have recommended. So
You're like Don Quixote.
okay, so the second item in the director's report is the election sensitive late report policy. As I'm just going to give a quick reminder, this is the same issue we talked about at the last meeting, and think the meeting prior, maybe just the last meeting. We had, I guess the last meeting before that, we had discussed in general terms what the commission would want to do on this. So this is the proposed policy where currently what generally happens is there is a, when someone has filed a report very late, the commission will dismiss the complaint as long as that report is filed at some point before the hearing occurs. So this can be 6, 7, 8 months after the deadline has passed, and the commission will usually say that the civil penalty stands as adequate deterrence, and will dismiss the complaint prior to a hearing, as long as the report is actually on file. Basically identifying the focus of the complaint is to gain compliance, which is usually what's going on. This is more of a note that when reports are filed very late around election time for an active candidate, so if someone's on the primary ballot or on the general election ballot, and that report is filed after the election has occurred or on the day of the election, voters haven't realistically had the opportunity to utilize that information in any meaningful way. And part of the reason the Campaign Finance Act exists is to provide that information for voter literacy, and provide some sort of disclosure benefit to the public. Let them, otherwise, a perception of anti-corruption benefit is more limited. So this essentially identifies that if a complaint is filed, or if a report is filed on or after Election Day, which is already over a week late, then the commission will not dismiss the complaint just because it is eventually filed before a hearing.
What is the official deadline? The week before?
It's 8 days prior to the election day. So it's the Monday, essentially it's the Monday on the week prior.
So, and this, as drafted, it's 12 PM on that Monday prior.
So the way this is drafted is that if it's filed, if the election sensitive report is not filed before the day before the election, noon on the day before the election, then it's too late for voters to utilize it in a meaningful way. Now we could change that to election day itself. We could change it to whatever. It's in there as this is what I was thinking as, purely this is my thought.
So would we be able to get it published in a meaningful time period if we get it on noon before election day?
That's the question, right? I mean, we
Right.
could have it published. We can have it up on our website, but realistically, how far in advance is meaningful for the voters? I don't know.
Do we know a history of how people may be maybe a little too aggressive in terminology, but launder their donors?
I think that a lot of what happens with campaign finance reports, sometimes the public goes and looks at it, they need an opportunity to do it, but a lot of times what we see is media wants to write stories on things that happen, and that triggers people to go look at reports or care about particular things. I guess we can call up some journalists and ask. I don't know if anyone's going to pump out a story that quick when a report is filed on noon the day before an election day. I imagine someone will get something to print.
And we
But
set the deadline to be a week before, and then magically all the donations occur after that.
right, of course.
In theory.
Yeah.
I do want to be clear, though, that the deadlines are already set by statute.
Right.
Okay, just making sure we're on the same page here.
Yeah. The report deadline is the Monday on the week before. It's 8 days before the election. This essentially says the day before the election, if the report is still not filed at noon, we file a complaint and it will not be dismissed just because it's filed later on before a hearing. It can be dismissed for other reasons. It can, if they think that they have some unique reason why they shouldn't be penalized, they can come to a hearing and explain that to the commission. They can do all sorts of things, but what the commission won't do under this policy is they will not just waive it. They won't dismiss it just because it was eventually filed.
I like the way it's drafted. It's well written, and even I think the penalty portion fits within the statute now. And I would just say the noon before an election seems way too late.
We
Why just make it the statutory deadline?
I agree with you, Chris.
Just make it so if it is filed late, we file a complaint.
Yes.
Or election sensitive.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, we can file a complaint 5 days after, where it's a really odd relic in the statute, but that means we would file the complaint on that 5th day as soon as we can, and those complaints would not be dismissed unless unless a report is filed on time.
That's pretty harsh.
But that's,
Right.
it's,
But it's reality.
But if
That
it's the
still gives
purpose
them
is
essentially a
to
5-day
encourage
grace
the
period.
transparency. I mean, you gotta have something holding
You have to have it at
them, holding their feet to the fire
Yeah, I mean, I would,
as much
think
as you can.
that makes sense to me.
This, so are we wanting an action to approve this policy, and then how would it be disseminated, communicated, promulgated?
Well, two things first. First, I do want to note that the way it's currently drafted also has a formula built in. There doesn't need to be a formula built in, but the idea is that it adopts a similar tack as the FEC's, basically what the FEC uses more or less as civil penalties. They have a much more complicated formula than we have. This essentially says there's some baseline amount that you should be fined. This says $100 plus 5% of any contributions that you received during that period, noting that the more contributions you received, that's the more information that was shielded from the public that they had a right to know. And that would be increased by 25% every time they get a campaign finance reporting violation. So if they've done this multiple times, it goes up. So that's how it's structured. The action here, I believe, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a guidance document as written.
You need to call it that.
Yeah, it would be, if the commission wanted, we could have a motion to pass it as a guidance document. And we would promulgate this. It would be posted on our website because we're actually required to do that with guidance documents anyway, but we certainly would do that. And we would include some extra language in our campaign finance materials to candidates and treasurers because they're the ones who are subject to this. So to make sure that they're aware.
I would move that we adopt it as a guideline, subject to the concerns that Mr. Berger and I raised.
I want to clarify, guideline or guidance document because of
Guidance document.
Okay.
Before we do that though, I mean, I know, I don't put them on the spot, but our primary visitor is here. If there's, it would be nice to have some public input, whether it be this meeting or the next meeting.
Yeah, well,
Spotlight, please.
Sorry, Josh, I
Put
asked
them
you
on.
if you had comments on this last time and I don't think you did, but
Got called on in law school.
The cold call.
yeah, we're gonna start cold calling people who attend our meetings now.
Yours don't make it, I don't
We
take
have a
it.
definition of public. No, I was just looking up whether the election sensitive includes all reports, because 41 and 48 is any report, I think. Is that right? Or-
Yeah, this is specific to A1 and A2.
Yeah, A1 and A2 are the primary and general election reports. And it would even for those reports, the way it's written is it's only someone who would appear on that ballot. So even like a primary election report, if it's a candidate who doesn't have a primary election, it doesn't matter, even though they do have to file that report.
And if
This
there's
applies.
receipts and expenditures.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, because A3 is the off year one.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, no, I think that's good to have that distinction. I'm fully supportive of giving more guidance to the consequences of certain failures to act, and some violations are more serious in terms of affecting election than others, so I support specificity. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment.
I would second the motion.
Okay.
I like the formula aspect of it because one of the things we're trying to get away from is anything that appears to be arbitrary and capricious on, what kind of day is the commission having? What kind of candy or cookies did they have?
And
We
I
want to
will,
eliminate that. I like math. I don't do math, but I like math.
I will say as well that this is also something that can always be adjusted. So if we get into another election cycle and the commission determines the baseline is too high, the formula doesn't work, something is wrong with it, something could be done better, then that's always something that can be adjusted.
So it's a guidance.
Mr. Chairman, my motion and Mr. Berger, I think, is seconded.
Could I
Got it.
clarify the motion is, if the election sensitive report is not filed before the grace period expires, instead of before 12 p.m. on the day prior to the relevant election, is that the correct?
Hold on, I thought we were saying it was gonna be the actual statutory deadline,
Statutory has a built-in.
There's a built-in grace period.
which is within that, so the 8 days includes a grace or does not?
Civil penalties can begin after 2 days, complaints can be filed after 5 days,
So it's just gonna be after the 5?
after 5. Because we can't file a complaint.
The earliest
the
we
fifth
can.
day. We would file a complaint the first day we could, is what this would create.
since election day is always a constant, what would that date be then?
We would always be filing complaints the morning, I mean, Saturday, if we theoretically were in the office, but Monday morning.
Okay, so we are talking about 8 days then.
Well, it'd be, so the election day, it's due, so the report is due 8 days before on that Monday. 5-day grace period before you file a complaint, which lands on Saturday.
Yeah. So do they file, do they get a file within the grace period? Or
We're getting into mosaic law now.
I will note that we can always, it's something we have never done before, but I will note that the statute says that the report has to be filed on that day, or it is a violation. Anything after that day is technically a violation. We just don't deal with it that way. But if it's filed late, it's still a violation.
I would say it's 2 Mondays before the election.
Yeah, so essentially if it's, what you're saying is we can't file the complaint until later, but if it's filed late, even within that 5-day period, it's still late, it's still a violation. We will treat it accordingly.
Seems what would help the public.
It's very clear. I mean, if it's late, it's late. That's what that would mean.
Noted. So does this in any way change the motions as they've been made?
I don't think so.
Okay. Any additional comments from any commissioners? Hearing none, we'll just take a vote on the motion to adopt the policy as a guidance document with the qualifications that Director Skoglund just discussed, and I believe will be reflected in the minutes. Just with respect to the specificity of when the actual report is due for purposes of this policy. So,
Got the whole motion.
well, all in favor of approving the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The motion passes. Returning to the agenda, under the heading of Executive Director's Report, we also have requested civil penalty data.
Okay, this one I'll try to be brief on because I've talked at you a lot today, sorry. This is the requested information on civil penalties broken from 2019 to 2022 calendar years, broken down by offices as requested at the last meeting. And you see that a lot of the penalties we talk about are PACs and parties. We do get a fair number of those, but when we talk about candidates, which was the request here, you see that statewide candidates, for example, look like a pretty high percent, but that's frankly just because there aren't that many candidates. And of the 6 penalties that was for statewide candidates, that's 4 candidates, one of which is Vermin Supreme and his treasurer, and one other person who was assessed twice. So it's not a lot of people that we're talking about here. Education, for example, looks like a high percentage, but that's of the 3 candidates, that's 2 candidates that were assessed. One of them was assessed twice. And this is because percent is not a great way of looking at this, but I didn't have a clearer way of approaching it because of the number of reports. You get a civil penalty for a late filing of a report. Number of candidates is one way to look at it. Number of reports would be another way to look at it, but this was clear because we wanted to look at it by number of candidates. So Senate, you'll notice that from Senate, representative, and city all are fairly consistent, right around that 7 to 8% margin. County looks like they're great, that they've got 1,700 candidates and only less than 2% of them get civil penalty. This is mostly because a lot of these local candidates, and county in particular, file a lot of affidavits, which means they're not filing reports. So for example, just offhand, I think we had discussed this morning that one of these years, there was 1,100 candidates and 700 affidavits filed. So there were only 400 candidates who were even filing reports during that period. So that percent looks a little off. It probably would be much closer to that 7 or 8% that is consistent with the other races as well. Honestly, I didn't think it would be that consistent. So it's interesting to see it broken down that way. But that's all I've got. I can take any questions as well.
Any questions?
What I hear you saying is we take out our unique candidates, recidivist candidates from the statewide and maybe even education. We find if their percentages match up with Senate, rep, and city.
I think that they wouldn't be too far out of the norm. The issue is that there's just not that many candidates, especially for education. Statewide, you just get a lot of candidates at different times, not in terms of number, but a lot of candidates who kind of are on the outside looking in, who aren't as used to the process. You have obviously some well-financed candidates and then some other candidates who are also trying to run as well. Which often, sometimes those candidates are good at filing reports and sometimes they're not.
Got it. Any additional questions? All right, turning back to the agenda, the next installment is a general counsel's update. Caitlin?
Thank you. So I am gonna try and keep this brief. The first part of my general counsel's update was already largely addressed, which is just the statutory authority that the commission has to implement the policy that was just adopted as a guidance document. As Commissioner Berger indicated, there's permissive language within 4181, which is the statute concerning civil fines, that essentially the legislature has just imposed caps on the fines that the commission may assess, but nothing prevents the use of the formula or the guidance document that was just adopted. The larger portion of my general counsel's update was that at last meeting, it was brought to my attention that some of the commissioners were concerned with respondents' engagement in our complaint process. So I felt it was appropriate to go through each phase of the complaint process and provide a summary as to when respondents are able to provide commentary to the commission. So in the sufficiency stage of the complaint process, the respondents are served a copy of the complaint, and if there are any amendments, they would be served those as well, both first class and by certified mail. Respondents have a right to request copies of evidence, although in my time here, although I know that hasn't been super long, that has not occurred. If that was to occur, they would get access to whatever is requested. At the sufficiency stage, respondents do not yet have a right to respond. Because sufficiency, the rationale is largely because sufficiency is a question of law for the commission. The commission is not looking exactly at the accuracy of all the facts, but rather if the facts were true as they have been pleaded, would that constitute a violation of the Campaign Finance Act?
When our executive director files a complaint, it's usually sufficient. But we do get complaints from people outside the commission that sometimes are not sufficient.
Yes, members of the public have the ability to file complaints as well. And so this sufficiency stage is a filtering process to ensure a lot of the time with a member of the public, it would be to make sure that they complied with including addresses of individuals and including citations to the statute where they thought a violation would occur. And that is what the sufficiency stage is primarily for. Once the commission votes on sufficiency and the complaint moves to the probable cause stage.
Pardon me.
Yes.
So on the sufficiency side, sounds like that's almost like a summary judgment sort of approach where we're making a determination as a matter of law that the facts presented, if accepted as true, would constitute a violation.
Similar to a motion to dismiss, if you take the facts as pleaded as true.
Well, it's dismiss or summary judgment. I mean, it sounds like it's, well, no, it's
a summary judgment.
Yeah, that's
sure.
Does it require the commission to actually say that the facts as alleged would constitute a violation?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have I feel like there's more to that. Was there follow-up or?
Well, no, I mean, it's simple when it's an issue of somebody missed a deadline.
Sure.
And that's so far all I've seen. But if there's a deeper question, then that sufficiency determination is actually a very substantive action by the commission, because we're saying that those facts would constitute a violation of the act.
Yeah.
But we haven't found the facts yet. And
I know
the probable cause gives the other party the opportunity to contest the facts that are in the complaint.
Does that prevent them from later arguing the law? Because we've now concluded under sufficiency that it is a violation of those facts of proven.
I think they can argue the law at any stage of the proceeding.
Are we not bound by our sufficiency determination?
No, the sufficiency determination is just that the complaint alleges a violation.
That we said if those facts are proven, will be a violation.
That's right.
So we've determined as a matter of law that those facts will be a violation without hearing from the defendant.
If they can
If the
still,
facts are correct.
they can still argue that the law is unconstitutional, they can still argue that, the law is vague or, that doesn't prevent that kind of argument.
It can be raised and also subject to review as to whether the commission followed the law or did they misapply the law.
That's true.
So I'm, when I read the memo, though, I take that to be a legal determination from the commission.
It's just a legal determination is that the facts that are alleged would be sufficient to constitute a violation. It is not saying there's not an analysis of evidence of if that actually happened. It's just if these things were true, would that constitute a violation?
Right.
Yes.
And they can still argue that the law is unconstitutional, both at the hearing.
Similar to a preliminary hearing.
No, and this, they could argue that, in appeal to the district court or beyond.
And so still a lawyer, so I think, what does that turn into a law of the case situation, Judge? So in that sense, this is I've only seen it in terms of these very ministerial sort of violations. But this could be a very substantive part of the process.
We have had complaints filed by people outside of this commission, which in my view is always a mistake. Person sees a violation, they should contact the executive director and have the executive director file the complaint. But we've had complaints filed by people outside the commission, and they allege certain facts, and they allege a violation of the law, but under those facts, it's not a violation of law. So it wouldn't be a sufficient complaint.
I
We
understand.
dismiss it because it's not sufficient. Sometimes they refile it to make it sufficient. Sometimes it goes away.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the discussion. This is all very helpful and I think educational to everybody. So as a segue, in the probable cause determination, as has already been discussed, the respondent has explicitly the ability to submit a written statement prior to the probable cause determination. We notify respondents of this right. And attachment A to my update is an example of the letter that we send to respondents notifying them of that right.
But they also have the right to appear in person, though. They're not.
Not at the probable cause level, no.
The regulation is poorly written. That interpretation comes from the fact that it says an opportunity in person or through counsel to submit a written statement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess they can show up in person to give a written statement. It's very confusing, honestly.
Because we have had people appear at probable cause hearings and make statements. Maybe they shouldn't have been allowed to, but we have allowed that to happen in the past.
Well, the regulation allows only a written statement, so that is what is allowed under the regs. Again, it's worded oddly, so I can see why that could have resulted in confusion previously.
Being a unique double-edged sword, the complainant actually used as a defense that I appeared and gave an oral statement and therefore I should have given a written statement. I've seen those kinds of things before in my room, but
I think if something.
I think it's one of those no harm, no foul.
Yeah, and now the probable cause determinations are, that would no longer be allowed under CAPA because that would be an ex parte communication. We're not allowed, if Mark is the complainant, he and I are not allowed in the room for a probable cause determination. The same would be true for the respondent and their counsel. So the probable cause statement is not an answer. The answer is allowed by the respondent later in the proceeding. If a probable cause statement is submitted to commission staff, we will provide anything that might even remotely constitute a probable cause statement. An email or something that we were to receive that potentially was a probable cause statement would be included in the materials if it had ever been received.
Are we still going to have a 3-member subcommittee to find probable cause?
I It's not required.
We did that in the past, so as to not pollute the entire commission with the probable cause.
That may be appropriate in instances where we have some of these more complex complaints, such as what Commissioner Berger hinted to. It is optional for the commission to do that. There's nothing prohibiting it. The commission staff will provide, as I mentioned, anything that even remotely could constitute a probable cause statement. If one has not been included in the commission's materials for that session, then it has not been submitted to commission staff. No one is privy to it. Once we get to after probable cause, if it is found and the commission or the complaint rather moves on to the public hearing, this aspect of the complaint process is most similar to a traditional trial type setting or a civil, Chapter 60 process. A notice of hearing is sent out, and pursuant to CAPA, the notice of hearing is fairly detailed. It is also attached, a sample is attached to my update as well. It somewhat functions as a pretrial order. It's not that level of depth, but it at least highlights the key issues involved, lays out information regarding the hearing, and we've also included, I believe I've included links at the bottom of the notice as well to, I did. There are links we've included, and we also have a packet that we send out with our regulations and statutes when a complaint is first filed. But I've additionally included links to the public websites to find access to statutes and regulations in that notice of public hearing. After the respondent has been served the notice of public hearing, they have 10 days from the day of service to file a verified answer with the commission. If they do not file a verified answer, regulations provide that everything listed in the complaint that has not been admitted or denied is deemed admitted by them not filing an answer. That is
By verified, do you mean they just verify it themselves, or they do it before notary public?
It's verified before notary public in the same way that the complaints are verified. Additionally, with the introduction of CAPA as well, CAPA tracks largely with our procedural regulations and statutes concerning complaints. CAPA does add additional detail, such as motions for summary judgment, for instance, can be introduced, and any other types of pleadings. If any of those pleadings are ever introduced to commission staff, they will always be furnished to the commission immediately upon filing. If they have not been included, that means that the commission staff has not received any pleadings from the respondent whatsoever. Discovery is also allowed at this stage once the public hearing has been set. That is subject to the discretion of the presiding member over the hearing. The presiding member is identified in the notice of public hearing as well. And while we don't include, direct email addresses or anything like that, if someone was attempting to get in touch with the presiding member, commission staff would make sure that occurred. Each party may also propose findings and conclusions to the commission for consideration. This is again something that we would provide to you all if we had received it. I also wanted to clarify, in my update, I discussed a proposed default order, which is a provision of CAPA. This is not required. KSA 77520 of CAPA uses the permissive language of may. So when a party is in default, the commission has the option to issue a proposed default order, which is served upon the party, and after a certain period of time, if the party does not refute the proposed default order, then default is awarded. The may means this is permissive, it is not required. Instances in which this might be appropriate is if we've had potential service issues or not, if the commission is potentially uncomfortable with the proof of service that the complainant has offered. This could be an option if we don't want to just immediately grant defaults. Otherwise, though, immediately granting default judgment is completely appropriate and is allowed under CAPA, is allowed under our own statutes, and now the rules of civil procedure apply as well, so it would also be appropriate under 6255. So default is an option. Additionally, after the hearing is concluded, the respondent, either party actually, has the right to file a petition for reconsideration within 15 days after the service of the final order. This is not a prerequisite to seeking relief in district court under the Kansas Judicial Review Act. That petition for reconsideration is not required to exhaust administrative remedies, but it is an option if the party would choose to do so. If they do not want to deal with the commission anymore and just want to immediately appeal to the district court, they may do so within 30 days of service of the final order from the commission. And that would be to the District Court of Shawnee County. I had one final comment, but I just wanted to make sure there aren't any other questions regarding the respondent's ability to engage. Yes.
Comments. One, if we're going to follow the default journal entry, is that a pseudo rule 170?
I don't remember 170 off the top of my head, Judge.
10 days, right, counsel? 14. Mhm.
14.
I'm concerned that if we're going down the path of a default journal entry that we generate and send out, now we do have, what's our regulation? What's the time span for the other party to respond to that? Because there's no regulation to say that. Whereas if we simply make the finding the default in open session and the journal entry is generated, then the triggering times for review of reconsideration and appeal fall into play. I'm concerned about having this gray area. I defer to Council Mr. Wyatt. He has it. But if I were sitting in his chair, I'd be wondering what's really happening.
You're discussing the proposed default order. I agree. I am not a fan of that. I see what you're talking about now. I am not. I am in favor of, I think it is most appropriate to grant default within session and have the commission vote in session. I agree.
Just create a lot of problematic issues.
We have that alternative if we don't have to go with the default.
Yeah, if you want to go to the gray area, I guess.
We don't have to go to the grade.
No, to be clear.
That's a may.
Yes.
Yeah. My second observation is that this entire hearing process, and again, I'd like to have Mr. Knight join in if he would. I need to see it as a trial or an administrative hearing. I see it as a well-regulated free-for-all. Because we have commission members entitled to ask questions.
Mhm.
Now we're going back to the English system where the jury gets to ask questions during the trial.
Mhm.
And counsel may be really,
Well,
concerned about that type of
we're not jury, we're still judges.
I'm just saying, John, that when the commissioners are allowed to ask questions,
But a judge is allowed to ask questions.
and at that point in time, most councils either think or some are brave enough to say, Judge, I would appreciate allowing me to lose my case on my own merit without you helping me. But I'm just saying, I've been appointed the hearing officer in the matter that's about to come up, and I'm used to wearing a robe that has a lot better parameters to it, and it's not on our table today. It's just an observation.
It's something that we all are taking under advisement very closely looking at that.
We may ask the legislature to consider getting both of these rules in the same sync, so we know how we're going to conduct that.
Yes.
And the default judgment is just one of violation, or does it also include penalty?
Well, it includes.
Include the civil fine. Yeah.
And our civil fine, though, is not a liquidated sum.
Yeah.
It's an up to figure, so now we get into
Correct.
thing issues of
Yes.
giving notice under 118 or
Right.
454 on what that amount of
Just a lot of
damage.
banana peels laying around.
Yeah,
Anyway, didn't mean to start an argument.
No, I appreciate that for sure.
We stay away from the default gray area.
Stay away from the gray area. I wanted to address that because I realized it was in my report.
Chris and I's question on that area completely though, when we assess the penalty.
just maybe as a rule of practice, the person who's making the complaint would have to ask for a specific sum of money. Otherwise, there would need to be a second hearing to determine that damage.
That's a good thought. Mr. Knight, do you have any interest in joining my conversation?
Yeah, well, just generally, I think that the process isn't improving. I think I haven't litigated heavily before the commission, before the last couple of years, I think we learned a lot of things as far as the statutes being anemic in some places, and there's guidance in other places. So I don't know, I think it's really helpful to kind of go through systematically, even the 10 days, like it's helpful to update your reg to make that match the new way of date calculation is 14. And then the other thing with the answer is I'm kind of flabbergasted by that, because you also have Fifth Amendment considerations, because everything you do is ultimately going to be referred by prosecution for prosecution.
Maybe you refer, that's my next consideration.
Yeah.
We're not taking it to the next level. So as the hearing examiner, if I look at the respondent and I say, you know, do you wish to have an opportunity to visit with an attorney? I'm not allowed to give you any legal advice. However, I can say, as a matter of fact, that in some circumstances, this matter may be referred to a prosecuting body, and they may make a decision that could affect your other freedoms that are beyond our control as a commission. I think that takes it completely out of the purview. They could end up finding not only would they be going after some type of a civil penalty, they might be going after criminal. Now we're talking loss of freedoms. It's quite much.
Are there any additional?
Discussion at a later date, it's not something on our agenda, just.
The last thing I'd say is I think the OAH involvement now simplifies some of that, because CAPA, if the respondent avails themselves of the OAH, right, you then preside as the final determiner of the final order based on the preliminary order issued by OAH. So there may be cleaner process available that route, but there is going to be hearing in front of the commission, which frankly is a lot cheaper from an attorney fee expense than going through the formalities of OAH, than cleaning up these. I think it would be helpful to weigh some of these things.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to delay the meeting, but that's all I've been to say.
No, I agree with Caitlin. I think this is all valuable feedback for us to consider just how we improve process and the way the commission operates. So I think it's all valuable. Caitlin, do you have anything else to add?
Yes, I just had one final thing. This was not included in my the written report. I just wanted to point out, you all will notice that that the motion before and I'm choosing my words very carefully here. I guess I'll use the words, the close.
Confidential portion.
The confidential portion of the meeting, thank you. The confidential portion of the meeting, the motion for that is now a motion to recess. This is more appropriate under COMA than the executive session motion. We began discussing this last meeting, and after consulting with conflict counsel, Mr. Rodriguez, we determined that because KSA 754318 G1, which is exclusions of COMA, allows for excludes quasi judicial determinations from COMA, that executive session was not appropriate. Instead, the commission, when it's determining confidential complaints, is engaging in a quasi judicial determination, and our confidentiality statutes prevent or require the session to be closed to the public anyway. So the quasi judicial language and the change to the language of recessed session, best word thing we could come up with, is what's used. We leave, you all meet for a certain amount of time, then we reopen the session. But that is the reason for that language change to prevent any confusion there.
Yeah, nothing actually is different in terms of what you're doing. It's just the language that's being used to describe it.
So we can recess to discuss the amount of the fine.
Then in reference to the hearing,
Excuse me?
this is not in reference.
No, this is in reference to,
Reference to executive session.
Okay.
yes, sorry for that confusion.
Non-open meeting.
Thank you.
All
And that
right.
was all.
Okay. Returning back to the agenda, we have some civil penalty waiver discussion.
I see that Jane has joined us remotely.
Oh, good.
Welcome, Jane.
Hey, Jane.
So I think we have
I'm
the.
here. I've been here. I've just been quiet.
Fine, I hope you're doing well.
I am. It's a challenge.
So we have the civil penalty waiver discussion. I know we've talked at length in multiple meetings now about the forms, the financial hardship declaration, and the adoption options, whether guidance document first and then regulation later, or just a guidance document at all. I think my understanding and what my takeaway from the last conversation is that primarily the only hang up anyone had with the documents as they existed was whether or not certain items should be redacted on the financial hardship declarations. And to that extent, to what's legal or not. Did you want to
Yes,
address that? I'll
I did want
with the
to,
chair's
Also thought
permission.
we
I'll-
Raise the issue of medical.
Right,
yeah, that was
Right,
something I was
yes.
gonna.
HIPAA issues.
HIPAA issues.
Yes, and with that, I'll defer to Caitlin with the chair's permission.
Sure, yeah.
So I guess I would like to talk about the HIPAA concern first. I am not sure the ideal way to limit this because it's not a HIPAA violation if they're voluntarily telling us what
Correct.
their medical circumstances are. I don't know if that resolved the issue.
I think part of the concern was our responsibility and potential liability for what happens with that information.
Or just the willingness to share.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Well, I think, if they go into detail of private medical information, that seems something that would certainly be redactable under Cora. That is, I'll have to, let's see, I don't remember the exact exception off the top of my head.
Can we just simply include that there's two provisions in the document. You waive any privilege of this document being a part of the public record, or you are asking this part of the document to be found excluded from the public record. They could make that choice in their submission.
I think we still have problems with disseminating private medical information for the public at any point, even if they agree to it. I think we ought to be careful on that point.
That's why I'm asking, if we put the burden on them, does that give us any better protection? I think it does.
I think we still may have problems even if they consent to the release of that. I just think we ought to be careful with that.
I think we can redact that information from what's
I think
included in the
I
public.
think that's the thing to do. Yeah.
I think that we can. I've spoken with Jay as well, who is at the Attorney General, has more exposure to Cora, and we did discuss that. Yes, I mean, the way that we could do that is the commissioners have access to the unredacted materials, but what's included in the public materials is redacted by staff. So you all can see everything that you need to see, and we can, but there's a very strong justification that that is a serious invasion of privacy for personal medical data to be included. And there's not a public interest that would justify access to that information anyway. So I think that's the approach. Is you thought?
Take the approach as a commission that all medical information is private. It's only reviewable by the commission and those authorized in the commission setting. As to public, it's all redacted. That's just going to be the policy.
We just follow
The
Cora.
more fair.
So
If I might add to that as well. There is so my understanding from our conversations is that the issue really is that this area of Cora about our ability to redact public meeting records really comes down to what is, I forget the phrase, intensely personal.
It's
or
a
something like that.
clearly unwarranted invasion.
Yeah,
of personal
that's a
privacy.
clearly unwanted invasion of personal privacy, which my understanding is that that's been tested with regard to like social security numbers, things like that, but not a whole lot beyond that. So there isn't clear precedent one way or the other, but so I think that, pursuant to our conversations, we can redact it as what we believe is a publishing that data would be a clearly unwarranted invasion, but we would probably want language. And I think, and not to put you on the spot because you're here as conflict counsel, and I don't want to ask you to wear multiple hats, but in our conversations before, my understanding is that we can make the language reflect that. Basically, we could, if someone filed a Cora violation and a district court said that's not an invasion of personal privacy, then we could lose the core violation and that information could become public,
Mhm.
but it wouldn't be our fault then, essentially.
Yeah,
Why even go there?
I would just make the note that Cora, that in our view, Cora allows us to redact this, but a court could choose otherwise.
yes.
There is a gray area because there is no precedent here.
Mhm.
I would doubt that we would be criticized or found liable in any way if we simply keep it confidential. If someone felt that they had a right to access that over and above the objection of the party providing it, they could file appropriate motions for that, and then we're out of that. It's not our call.
Right, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Do we need to change the language then in that first paragraph
I think so.
about what documents are included in the public commission meeting materials?
I think you had a good recommendation.
Yes, we suggested language that's, for example, it essentially says further, I understand that some or all the information included on and with this declaration may be made publicly available under the Kansas Open Records Act and a citation to the act.
We will try to redact it and do everything we can. We think that we're on pretty stable ground. I think the law is good for us.
But I would say I like Commissioner Helmer's recommendation that it be the policy to redact.
Mhm.
You know, and force it out of our hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Okay, so we will adjust that language then.
Can I do the clarification real quick?
Yes.
Or,
I didn't say clear that hands. That's the right.
no, it's not. But are we having
Oh, Charles.
where the commission can see the information, but the public can't? Okay.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Correct.
Will this
So-
be health and financial? Or are we getting?
One step at a time.
financial? Okay.
That was about to be my question
yeah.
too. So because there are some things that may not be redactable on the financial hardship form as an unwarranted invasion, some that might be. So I don't know what the opinion of the commission will be, but I think you're right. That's the next question.
Are there any other concerns? Sorry, Commissioner Harrison's been trying to speak. I'm so sorry.
I also just was wondering about the financial hardship declaration, and I'm not sure that it probably fits the statutory standard as well as the medical redactions would, but I personally still think that if we could have the financial hardship declaration form only available to the commission and then, upon request or something like that, then it would be published to whoever was requesting it, that could be also good. But I don't know, it doesn't seem like it fits what we're allowed to do by statute as well, but.
Yeah, and I agree with your thought process. Have them both be kept confidential except to the commission members. And then if someone wants to force that issue and say, under open records, we have the right to that, they can file that and seek it, and we don't have to worry about it then. Whether it's really offensive on the financial side or not is not the question. It's a matter of, do I really want any of my financial information known by anybody that doesn't have any real reason to have it except the commission's deliberating this matter? I raised it to the commission because I want you to consider it, but I don't have any reason for the world to know anything about it. Whether it's my social security number, whether it's my bank account, the balance of my bank account, or who I owe money to, doesn't matter.
And some of that could also veer into the natural disaster and theft category as well. If they're making a claim that their identity was stolen and they have to disclose information, whether it's social security, bank account, credit card, whatever, like that. So I think we just need to be sensitive to personally identifiable information and respect that, but also allow them to make a claim for good cause, but explain what is needed so that we can make an appropriate decision.
Yeah, I could see definitely how the reports included as documentation that could include that information as well.
Yeah, they submit a police report. That's all
Yeah.
over the world.
Sorry, buddy.
Mr. Nye? Yeah.
A14, so I know not. But A14, correspondence between a public agency and private individual, why wouldn't that fall under that?
What's this?
Because it reads that.
This is an exception?
As an exception, correspondence between a public agency A private individual other than correspondence that is intended to give notice of an action, policy, or determination relating to any regulatory, supervisory or enforcement responsibility of the public agency. So it has to do with potential notice from the agency to the individual that is not open, or that is open record, but this exception would cover that.
I mean, if I were on the other side arguing that, I would say that the people requesting waivers aren't private individuals. They're candidates for office, they're people running PACs. I think that's a difference. They're not just a person from the public who's writing to may ask a question of the commission, for example.
I had a different.
And I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm saying that that's the argument I would make on the other side. I don't want to be on the other side, right? Of a core request.
I mean, since I brought it up last time,
Yeah.
that's the only reason I'm chiming in now, is that if you have a form that says, tell us all your dirty secrets, oh, and by the way, this could be open record, you're not going to get any information that is relevant, because unless it's clear that you're not going to disclose their medical condition. And so I think it's a little chilling, so to speak, to say this is going to be open. So finding a way to make sure that you can close it.
I mean, we could say that we can redact to the extent permitted by law.
But the big distinction here is that this is not a required form.
Right.
This is a voluntary
that's
form
also
due to a violation of the rules that would require them to seek, you know,
Exemption,
stay or-
forgiveness.
Yeah.
whatever you wanna call it.
This form
Exactly.
really.
No, that's a really good point.
benefit.
So this was part of like applying for the position. I have greater concerns, but the medical side, that feels like we're over something else, because it feels very private. We get into financial on voluntary application. I tend to think, you know, if you want the relief, you have to make the request. It's a little different.
To your
Yeah.
point, there is a different level of justification for redacting medical information compared to the financial information. You're on much stronger ground when you're redacting medical information. A judge reviewing a core request that was redacted, full of redacted financial information might very well agree with you and say that shouldn't be redacted, give them the full form. And that just hasn't been tested. So that's kind of the reason for this trepidation about guaranteeing that it won't be publicized.
That
None
was,
of them should ever guarantee it.
Right.
well, and I had concerns regarding the redaction of the financial hardship declaration, because a lot of the information in there is already public information to a certain extent. For example, if they're a state employee or something like that, their income's gonna be available. We're gonna know their employer's information. If they have a mortgage, the Register of Deeds will have their mortgage on file. Bankruptcy's public record, all of those things. Or if your business is, if they own a business and it's an LLC, it has to be registered with the Secretary of State. So I think there is an argument strongly justifying redaction of certain information, but not necessarily the entire form. That's my concern.
I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but Commissioner Detterding, I know at one point you had a lot of thoughts on this issue.
Yes.
And I just didn't want you to be shut out of the conversation if you have thoughts.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think my cohorts in crime who were not here the day that we presented this, but are now there, are doing a fine job.
Okay.
Oh, I'm the criminal. Oh, I get it.
Yeah, you two, right there on my screen popped up at the same time.
You can ask for a waiver there.
I say, thank you, I know on the screen.
So where do we go from here? Taking in all this feedback about medical hardship, financial hardship, are we wanting to take an action to move forward with this form? Are we looking to create a guidance document, as we did earlier in this meeting, about how and when we will redact these types of submissions going forward? Caitlin, what do you suggest?
As far as the initial waiver request form, it seems that we are in agreement that so long as we include language that commission staff will redact personally identifiable information from the public materials, the initial waiver request form, it is my impression from the room that we are all in agreement, so long as the PII can be redacted and we can adjust the language to indicate that it may be subject to a Cora disclosure. That form is acceptable. Is that fair?
Any disagreement? Is it fair to say we will redact to the extent permitted by law?
That's
Not of the form, but of the supplemental materials.
Correct.
Right.
yes.
Okay, so do we want to see that form? Do we want to hypothetically take an action on such a form? Do we want to revisit this issue at our next meeting in January?
I think we have the form, it would just be the supplemental materials to it.
Okay, got it.
I think the form is great.
The form is great with the addition of that language. That's all.
Okay.
You want to talk about this one as well?
Yes, for the second one, I mean, technically we could include the same language and determine based on the information they provided if any of it is. I mean, Jay, what are your?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that some level of redaction on these financial forms is an option for the commission. You're not required to. I don't think that monthly income or monthly housing expenses fall into the category of something that you would be mandated to redact in any sort of public form. So it's up to you what you think is consistent with adequate personal privacy protection. What you think might be chilling in terms of people who would otherwise provide one of these forms.
Can we identify which categories you think should be redacted?
Could that be something that we could include in a guidance document, kind of going along? with
Yes.
Categories of what Jay was mentioning, you know, we will consider.
And the person filling out the form will know.
We don't want to chill, but we don't want to release them. I mean, we can express our concerns and express the advantages, disadvantages, benefits.
We need that guidance document.
So we need that, okay.
So
Before the forms, we want a guidance document.
I would be the one.
Okay.
The guidance document.
Okay,
So a guidance document that spells out, not obviously the policy, but then also a discussion of what is redacted, why it's redacted, and just the general.
What could be redacted?
what can be redacted?
And
yes.
why.
We're reading statements as provided by law.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. So I think the plan then is that we will have a guidance document for the next meeting for the commission to consider that goes along with the forms.
Like, I'll work.
Thank you.
Just,
Appreciate it.
just a question on the monthly income, for example, should that be monthly gross income, all sources? Because some people think of income as, oh, I don't have a job or, you know, whatever. I'm just trying to parse it as people might, to make it a little clear.
Good idea. Yeah. Shop support income is maintenance income.
Correct.
Did you miss the meeting? We discussed this on subcommittee there, Kyle.
Of all
No.
criminals.
You didn't. You were there.
He's just
Okay.
helping us to remind, he's
That's
reminding
it.
us.
That's it.
Yeah.
So
He's
can
coaching.
we
Pulling
set this
my-
as an agenda item then in January? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and then that way we can just visit it at the same time. And it sounds like perhaps if there's any other feedback with respect to the form, we can perhaps seek to incorporate whatever the commission feels is necessary. Okay, well, we'll plan that as an agenda item. Going back to the agenda, there was a bullet point for public comment. I don't know if we completely touched on that.
We haven't cold called him yet.
Mr. Nye?
Sorry, I really wasn't paying attention.
Sure you were.
No, you guys, this is great.
Okay,
Do you have any public comment?
I have no public comment.
noted. The next item on the agenda are civil penalty assessments.
There are 4 and they're on your index. They're all candidates or treasurers. Or actually, they're all candidates this time. Yep.
Okay, and then the next item is civil penalty waiver requests, and I see that we have 5.
So the first one you don't have any writing on. It's Anthony Giardo. You had granted a waiver, his waiver request last time. It was $1,000. You had reduced it to 100 if he paid the reduced amount within 30 days. We received his reduced payment on day 31. He did not ask for an extension. I am asking on his behalf to just extend it by 1 day because I can't modify an order of the commission that way.
Was it received on that
We
day?
received it on the 31st.
What did he date his check?
I don't know.
When is the postmark on the envelope? Because you're determined to proceed at the date of the postmark.
I would just rather just have us extend it just to make sure that it's abundantly clear. No one can cause any trouble for him.
So John has moved. Do we have a
I'll
second?
I'll
Thank
second
you,
it.
Kyle. Any additional discussion on the motion to approve the waiver request? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
All opposed say nay.
Nay.
The motion passes. We next have a Jason Anderson.
Jane's muted, so I had to.
Yeah,
Be recorded.
Yes.
Yes, he does. You would say nay if he didn't.
Mark?
All right, next,
continue.
the next one is Jason Anderson, the treasurer for APAC. He was assessed $140 in September. He asserts in his waiver request medical issues and subsequent travel. I'll note that some mail and email did get returned that we tried to send to him, but his report was filed about a month late. So he would receive a $140 penalty. Typically, the historical practice of the commission, we still haven't adopted that policy. So it's medical issues. When someone asserts medical, we typically waive. I would recommend that the commission consistently do so here as well.
Any questions?
I so move.
I'll
Thank
second
you,
that.
Commissioner. Motion has been made by Commissioner Schonifer and seconded. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the motion to waive signify by saying aye. All opposed say nay.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Next is Mike Hoheisel, the treasurer of a PAC. That PAC, he was assessed $300 for filing a late report. He has this 2-paragraph letter here that he submitted. He asserts that he believed he had closed the PAC down. I think he had submitted an affidavit of inactivity and thought that that affidavit, which exempts you from filing reports, meant that the PAC was terminated, which it wasn't. He changed his email address. He and was traveling, so he didn't see our notices in either avenue. He did properly terminate it, is my understanding, and he did file zeros. He did not take in or expend any money for during that time frame. None of those fall into, they do fall in some categories we've seen before, but they don't fall into categories that we have automatic recommendations for. I have no recommendation on this item. $300 is the assessment in September.
Any questions?
I'd move that we waive $250 if he pays the $50 within 30 days.
Do any commissioners wish to second Commissioner Solbach's motion?
If my motion dies for the lack of a second.
Noted. We next have a Kylie King.
No other motion? I'm just making sure before I move on. Okay. I think Seal King, I think is her name. A lobbyist. She was assessed $1,000 in October. She was assessed. You have a 3-paragraph letter here. She mostly asserts that the organization was at fault because of some staff transition. They didn't spend anything during this time frame. She doesn't have access to the registered. When you register as a lobbyist, you register an email address and other contact information, just like a candidate. We send your information and any late notices or anything like that to that contact info. She actually says she doesn't have access to any of those avenues of contact. which is poor form on either the organization or the lobbyist part. There's some staff that missed emails, voicemails, and mail in all different respects. They had relocated the office and mail was not forwarded. So after the first two paragraphs, I was ready to say no recommendation, but in the last paragraph, she asserts medical. She was ill during this time frame, was hospitalized and was recovering, starting physical therapy. Pursuant to historical practice, the commission typically waives medical claims in waiver requests. I would recommend for consistency that they do so here as well.
And it was during the relevant time frame.
She says during these last several months, which implies that time frame, but it does not say that out.
All right. Given our historical precedents, I would move that we waive it.
Motion has been made by Commissioner Krull and seconded. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the motion to waive signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay.
Okay.
The motion passes.
The last one, you again don't have a writing for this. I guess you do. Yeah, you have the Yvonne Schneider's writing. Or no, I'm sorry, you don't have Yvonne Schneider's waiver request. She hasn't submitted a new one. This is a complicated one, and it's going to be an odd one. Caitlin and I have been working with her for a bit. So Caitlin, if I miss something, feel free to jump in. Yvonne Schneider was heading up a central committee in October of 2022, so a year ago, and was assessed $300 for late filing of a report. There was an issue where her treasurer had resigned and she became responsible for those reports and did not fully understand, she didn't read all the mail that she was being sent, etc. The commission in October provided a waiver to reduce that $300 to $50 if she paid within 30 days. The organization had been administratively terminated, so she just had to pay the reduced $50 balance. She ultimately did not pay that amount because she thought it was resolved. She had a phone call with our previous office manager where it sounds, my guess is, from the extent that I can ascertain, it sounds like our office manager told her there wasn't anything further she needed to do to submit a waiver request, but she interpreted that as there isn't anything she needed to do at all. And so even though we sent her mail saying that you still owe $50, you have to pay that amount within 30 days, she understood that phone conversation to mean that she did not owe anything. So when she started receiving our subsequent collections letters, she called the office and is concerned that she still owed $300. So she is requesting, and I'm just providing it to the commission with no recommendation, that she would like to be able to pay that $50 still today. So essentially an extension of the reduction that she was provided in October of 2022. She has actually already submitted a check for the $50 as well in case that the commission does grant it for what it's worth. I have no recommendation on this item. It's, like I said, it's a bit of an odd one. I don't know that we've ever had a request to extend a reduction a year before, but I understand that some confusion can happen. Our previous office manager isn't here anymore, so I can't confirm or deny anything about that conversation. I don't have any notes about it or anything like that that's helpful.
What is the proposed action here that we simply ratify?
The requested action would be to, that she is requesting is to essentially extend the time frame for her $50 reduction so that she can pay her $50 reduction today.
Okay.
So she only pays $50 on the $300 penalty.
Which is already paid.
Well, we can't deposit the check unless the commission grants it.
Right. She submitted payment.
She has submitted the reduced payment, yes.
I would support that, taking the citizen at her word, and the inability to corroborate or deny anything that went on in those conversations on the phone. Those things can happen, and we oftentimes reduce it to $50 from $300 if they pay within 30 days, and she's ahead of the 30 days. I would move that we accept it.
Second.
The motion has been made by Commissioner Krull and seconded by Commissioner Solbach. Is there any additional discussion?
generally speaking, I mean, do we want to hold our staff, the commission staff, to having to make a record and recording all conversations that they hold? Or to make fact issues between a government employee and a person who's asking for lenience for their failure? I mean, the rule of law is that you're not allowed to rely on a government employee with regard to deadlines and dates. So, you know.
So are you gonna go to the legislature for us and get an increase in budget for that?
Yeah, exactly, to record everything.
This is a simple way to handle it.
Be like
Well-
the Nixon tapes, you're saying?
So the motion has been seconded and we'll just take a vote on it. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say
Aye.
nay.
Nay.
The motion passes. Believe that concludes the civil penalty waiver request portion of the agenda. The remaining item on the agenda is a civil fine hearing, complaint number 748, Marcus Clark. Judge Helmer, I believe you are the assigned hearing officer in this matter. Are we aware of whether or not Marcus Clark is appearing today in person?
He's not here.
My information in speaking with council is that they have not had a response and there is no appearance at this point in time.
That's correct.
Has it just been crickets all the way along?
No,
You had contact?
we have had contact.
So for purposes of conducting the hearing, do we want to proceed?
That you should. It appears that it's a default matter.
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
curious.
Mhm.
So, Keelan, what do we do right now? Do we go through any formality in terms of a hearing? Do we simply accept that there is a default matter, or how do we proceed?
We still would proceed with the beginning of the hearing. So judge will still ask, for appearances and call the matter and all that. And then I will proffer the reasons to find liability, and make my motions.
Jurisdiction too.
Yes.
All right. Judge Helmer, can you do us the honors of conducting the hearing in this matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will. This is the matter of Mark Skoglund, Executive Director, Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission versus Marcus Clark. It is complaint number 748. This is a regularly scheduled matter that has been noticed to all parties, the commission and Mr. Clark. And at this point in time, I would ask for the appearances of the record.
Yes, thank you. Caitlin Bull Stewart on behalf of the complainant, Mark Skoglund, Executive Director of the Commission.
And Mark Skoglund also appears.
Yes, and Mark Skoglund also appears.
Very well. Matters being recorded in this regard. Council, it appears from the comments that I've heard that Mr. Clark is not present today. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your
Have
Honor.
you had any communication from him relative to his appearance in today's matter?
I have not.
Have you received any responsive pleadings to the complaint filed in this matter?
We have not received any responsive pleadings whatsoever.
Would you please identify for the record the method and manner of service and the attempts made to notify you of this complaint?
Yes, several attempts at service have been made for Mr. Clark. Regarding the complaint itself, the complaints were each served via first class and certified mail to Mr. Clark. But the mail kept coming back unclaimed for certified mail. We sent first class every single time from the complaint was filed through the notice of hearing. The only way that we know service has 100% been secured is regarding the notice of hearing in which Mr. Clark signed we received the certified mail return receipt back for both the notice of hearing and the entire record on appeal by serving Mr. Clark at his home address. Service prior to that was being made via certified and first-class mail to the address that Mr. Clark had on his campaign filings, which was his church. The mail kept coming back unclaimed. The only other piece of certified mail that Mr. Clark signed for was the civil penalty assessment order sent in November of 2022 for his errors and omissions notice for his October 2021 report.
Address that was sent to was.
The address that was sent to. Commissioner. The original complaint and the first address, which was the church, was 2636 Southeast Minnesota Avenue, Topeka, Kansas, 66605. And Mr. Clark's residential address is 4435 Southeast Adams Street, Topeka, Kansas, 66609. That address, his home address, was also included on other portions of the campaign filings. But we also used the county election office to discover his home address.
Based upon your record and investigation, were you asking the commission to determine that Mr. Clark is in default and proceeding with a determination of whether it's a violation?
Yes, Your Honor, we request.
At this point, are any commissioners wish to make inquiry to council relative to this process at this time?
The complaint itself, did that get served on him? Did he sign for it?
He didn't sign for it, but it went via first class mail as well, and that was not returned
To not his place of residence?
to the address he had on file for the for his campaign filings. He has received a copy of the complaint, though. The entire administrative record, including the complaint, the probable cause memorandum, and any other notices that the commission has provided, was served upon with a signed certified return receipt on October 30th of this year.
With the notice of this hearing?
Yes, correct. With the notice of this public hearing as well.
Is there a reason why we're not just treating that as being our first service of the complaint?
Because the statute allows for service to be completed upon an address that is on one of the filings with the commission. And we had been providing it to an address that was on file with his campaign filings. It is not, we can't control which address he puts on the forms. That was still statutorily satisfactory service. Although to ensure, we went above and beyond to provide the entire administrative record and the notice of public hearing at his personal address, just out of an abundance of caution. And it has been a month and we have not received any sort of response whatsoever.
Further inquiry by any other commissioners on the matter? Hearing none, council, your request is?
Our request is we request default judgment in favor of complainant Mark Skoglund. I have also a Service Member Civil Relief Act affidavit that I have completed to make sure that Mr. Clark is not in active duty military service. We would request default judgment, finding Mr. Clark liable for the 3 articulated campaign finance violations, 1 for failure to file his October.
You said you would make a proffer. The proper proffer is that you will summarize the witness testimony if witnesses were testifying instead of making the proffer.
Yes, I'm just responding.
To do that.
Okay.
Go ahead, council.
To find Mr. Clark liable for failure to file his October 2021 amended receipts and expenditures report, failure to file an amended January 2022 receipts and expenditure report and failure to file a January 2023 report. This is a pretty clear matter. The reports were required and they were never filed. The filing of such reports is critical to ensure that the public has access to relevant information for elections, and it is our agency's obligation to ensure that such reports are filed and any errors in such reports are corrected so that the public has access to accurate information. Mr. Clark was legally obligated to file as he functioned both as he was the candidate and the treasurer for his campaign and was legally required to file receipts and expenditures reports at various times in an election cycle, including as 254148A3 requires by January 10th of the year after an election. That was not filed. Additionally, upon the request of the commission, the treasurer may be required to file an amended report if there are errors and omissions that are included in a receipts and expenditures report filed. The October 2021 report contained errors and omissions because the beginning balance of that report should have matched the ending balance of the July 2021 report. It did not. The January 2022 report had errors because the beginning balance of that report did not match October's ending balance. And finally, the January 2023 report was just simply never filed. And his campaign was presumptively active throughout that year as it did not file any termination statement with the commission. KSA 254152 requires the commission to send via certified mail a notice to any person failing to file a report required by 4148. And the commission did that. The failure to files were sent for the 2 errors and omissions back in August 18th of 2022. We in fact, we sent those via first class and certified mail. And then the January report that was not filed this year, we sent failure to file in January of 2023. The commission is allowed to request via 254148F an amended report if there are errors and omissions, and that amended report must be filed within 30 days after notice by the commission. Again, that notice was provided in August 18th of 2022, and no such amended report has been filed. The burden of proof for the commission here is clear and convincing evidence. When making affirmative findings of fact regarding a hearing on the complaint, this has been defined by the Supreme Court as to be evidence that is sufficient to establish the truth of the facts as highly probable. The Kansas Supreme Court has said this is not necessarily a higher standard of proof. It does not require a level of proof higher than proof by preponderance, but it denotes the better quality of evidence. The evidence at issue here is not very complicated. This is more of a question of law. Mr. Clark was required to file and he did not, even though staff communicated with Mr. Clark numerous times, over 10 times since 2021. There have been communications, and in fact, this past spring, Mr. Clark came into the office to meet with Ms. Schneider, who runs the local campaign desk, and came in to meet to figure out how to fix his reports, came in with no reports, and left without fixing or filing anything. So staff have done everything that they can to communicate with Mr. Clark and secure compliance, but he is still, even though he's been provided sufficient notice, has not filed the requisite reports. As such, I request the commission to grant default, finding Mr. Clark liable for failure to file the 3 aforementioned reports. And I believe Mr. Scoglin has a recommendation for the civil fine amount imposed by the commission.
Well, first go through the process of determining whether it's a violation.
Oh, of course.
Mr. Silva, do you have a question?
Understanding that everything that you testified to, your witnesses would testify to.
Yes.
That satisfy you as appropriate?
It does.
Very well. Other commission members have questions of the statements of counsel, which is presented on the record as a proper testimony that we would have heard, and the witness been sworn under oath and presented the testimony.
So as a proffer, it seems acceptable. I'm noting that the affidavit that we would really be relying on for the complaint remains in its non-definitive formats. So all we've heard is a proffer without any actual evidentiary basis in the complaint or otherwise. I would ask that the complainant just be put under oath and restate their verification without the qualifying language. And then we'd have a sufficient basis.
The hearing officer will grant that request, and if that be the circumstance, then it's for the witness.
Yep. Okay. You do solemnly, excuse me, please, sir. You do solemnly swear, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the testimony you shall give in the matter at issue shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And this you do under the pains and penalties of perjury.
I do.
For the record, the witness sworn was Mr. Coughlin, who is executive director, and you may proceed, counsel.
I'm really just asking if, with the verification, instead of having the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, and request your verification, is that the information in the complaint is in fact true?
Yes, to the extent, yes. I swear this complaint has been examined by me and is true, correct, and complete.
Thank you.
Any other inquiry by any of the commissioners?
Does he need to adopt the proper without having to restate it completely?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, what's this guy's problem? Was he just being defiant? I'm just hearing that this guy's doing everything he can to avoid. What's the impression?
Commissioner to find out what this problem.
I mean, it just sounds to me like this guy's either got. It seems like the guy's either got some sort of mental defect or he's just being defiant. I mean, he's been given so many opportunities.
And it may be beyond the purview of the witness, but if the witness has knowledge, he certainly may answer.
Well, that's what I'd like, yeah.
I would recommend you not speculate.
Well, this is kind of the standard problem that comes before us is people just blow it off and don't take it seriously. Has nothing to do with their mental state of mind. They're just.
Well, no, but he even visits your office.
Possible.
And, that's what's so weird about it is that, he's taking action, but then he's doing everything he can to avoid. It's weird.
Well, Sonnenberger's thought process, I would tend to view it as perhaps he has some type of a mission or an agenda that he wishes to advance, but not disclose what it is, and we won't ever know.
Yeah. Just curious because it's something I deal in criminal defense work. I mean, there is a clear delineation when you're dealing with someone who just doesn't get it because he's got a mental issue, and then somebody who's just defiant. And that's what I was looking at here. So there's something going on here.
I've seen both as you have, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Anything further from the commissioners on this matter?
One other procedural matter. I appreciate learning about the statute as far as what our statute says jurisdictionally. How does that now interplay with the rules of civil procedure having been adopted for us in this proceeding and it having a different standard for jurisdiction?
Rules of civil procedure would not apply until there is an action. There isn't a chapter 60 action here. We're not at that point yet.
A subsequent procedure.
Yes, that would apply to the, if Mr. Clark chooses to appeal, he has that right under the Kansas Judicial Review Act. He can go and appeal and then chapter 60 applies to that. I mean, or other, yes.
Okay.
If there's no further inquiry or further discussion, I would entertain a motion.
What would that be? That we find the everything substantiated. I say.
I'd second the motion.
Yeah. Guilty is charged.
Falls back under my category of uneasiness. We're being asked to make a finding, and I'm not allowed to, as I'm a hearing officer.
Sure.
I'm not the judge. I would normally, if I were the judge, I would make specific findings of fact, and then I would apply them to the law, and then I would make a determination. This motion is just a generalized statement of, well, it sounds like there's enough, and let's go. And I don't know that that really meets the burden.
I think you can refer to her motion as being your motion. And I'll second that.
Second that motion.
Motion was, to be clear, to find Mr. Clark liable for failing to file the 3 reports at issue, the October 2021 amended report, the January of 2022 amended report, and then a failure to file the January of 2023 report. He would be liable under the civil fine statute for all 3.
That would be my motion.
That would be my second.
Further discussion?
What are our requirements as far as the number of people necessary to vote? And I had mentioned that because
Simple majority.
It's the majority of the majority.
Whether they're present or virtual.
It's,
people present, majority present.
yeah.
Wasn't that a change they made about our requirement to be present? or-
Mhm, they can be present.
Okay,
Or spectators. So it boils down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, no,
No,
they're
not allowed to vote. Yes.
they are elected.
But you're
They're allowed to vote even though they're not.
correct.
Okay.
Right. So my only, the factual basis has been stated. We have a factual support for it in light of some previous comments about the possible reference to criminal issues. I have a question about the sufficiency of jurisdiction of mailing something to a place of business, even though it's listed as our thing, in order to bring this individual in for potential criminal referral.
We don't make the decision with respect.
But we do make a finding.
We have to send it to the prosecuting authority, either the attorney general or the district attorney. But it's up to them whether or not they file a criminal action. We can make a recommendation. We don't have to make a recommendation, but we do have to send our findings over to them. And I think that the findings are there.
Understood.
We now have a motion and second on the table. Any further discussion? Now we'll call for the vote. All in favor of the motion?
aye.
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 Any opposed?
For my stated reasons.
Record will reflect Commissioner Rogers' nay. Hearing officer then accepting the vote of the commission and the motion has been presented, would find that the commission does have jurisdiction of the subject matter and the party in this matter. The proper and the testimony of the witness in this matter did constitute sufficient evidence to support the findings as set forth by the commission, and will adopt the motion and recommendation of the commission and its findings and its vote. And at this point, find that Mr. Clark is in default in this matter by his failure to file any responsive plea in this matter or appear today in person, and that as such, he has violated certain matters involving the requirements under the law in count 1, count 2, and count 3. Those findings have been made to the record. This portion of the matter is concluded. It would now be appropriate to proceed to the level of what further action will be taken in this matter is required by law. And with that, refer back to council.
Yes, so the next requirement is to determine the imposition of the fine amount, which I believe Mr. Scoglin has a recommendation.
Mr. Scoglin?
The practice of the commission for someone who has not filed a report, who is obligated to, but still has not done so at the time of the hearing, historically has been to assess a $5,000 fine with a significant reduction, which in historical recent times has been usually about $1,000, so reduced to $1,000 if the requisite reports are filed and the reduced amount is paid within 30 days. It's only been 1 or 2 instances when the commission has addressed an instance, to my recollection, where there were multiple counts of a failure to file. As we have here, we have 3 reports that are outstanding. The last time the commission dealt with this, I believe the commission assessed $5,000, then as if it was 1 report that was outstanding with the reduction. But the commission could assess up to $15,000, which would be $5,000 per count. I would recommend that the commission do whatever the commission determines, I do recommend the possibility of a substantial reduction if the reports are filed and the reduced amount is paid within 30 days or some time frame that the commission deems appropriate.
Any inquired by commission members of the recommendations of our executive director?
Would a $10,000 fine reduced to $1,000 be within your recommendation, Mr. Director?
Yes.
And I would so move, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion then to assess a fine of $10,000 with a reduction to $1,000 paid within 30 days of finding. Is that correct?
Yes, and I would add to my motion that we not make a recommendation to the Attorney General or the District Attorney.
Without recommendation of action on the part of. That's right. The motion is then before the commission. Do we have a second?
I would second that.
Mr. Cruel seconds the matter. Any further discussion on the matter?
Just so you know, to be consistent with my previous nay, I will need to be nay as well.
Very well.
Okay.
Now I have the matter. Any further discussion, comments? If not, call for the vote. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed?
Nay.
Commissioner Boyer opposes. Matter is concluded. Mr. Chair, the hearing now is concluded in this matter, and the chair or the hearing officer now returns the matter to the chair for further completion of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Helmer. Thank you, Caitlin. The next item on the agenda, it says recessed session. And do we still need to approximate time in order for resumption?
Yes.
I'd say no more than 10 minutes.
So I have 3:06 right now. We want to say 3:17. We need 10 minutes. 3:17. And then does Commissioner Kroll have the new language?
He does. He does. And this will be a challenge. I move that the commission recess this open meeting with Conflict Counsel Jay Rodriguez present to discuss matters related to confidential investigations pursuant to KSA 25-4165 and for good causes provided by KAR 19-6-2. Justification for recess is so the commission can exercise quasi-judicial functions when deliberating matters relating to said confidential investigations, as contemplated by KSA 75-4318, subparagraph G, subparagraph 1. The open meeting shall be resumed here at 3:17 p.m.
Seconded.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Or do any commissioners wish to make a motion?
If I'm given a time frame, I will make a motion. We will recess again. Want to recess again?
Commissioner Helmer, do you feel that we need to designate another interval of time to recess?
If that is a request by Commissioner Cruel, I would
It
certainly.
is not.
The thing being determined.
I don't think we do at this point, Mr. Chair. I think the bottom line is we can see if there could be a motion elicited from one of the commission members. And if there is no motion, then the matter is concluded.
All right, well, we'll give commissioners an opportunity now. Again, do any commissioners wish to make a motion?
Your recommendation is that some of these be dismissed and some of them we find probable cause.
I believe just one for, my recommendation is only one for probable cause and then dismiss the others without making a determination of probable cause. Would be my
recommendation. We dismiss the last four without a determination of probable cause.
I would second that.
The motion is to find probable cause in the first matter and then to dismiss the remaining.
Right now, just limited to
Just to dismiss the final four.
756 to 759.
Noted. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. The motion passes. All right. I believe we've resolved the issue. Well, I think all that remains is to point out that our next meeting will take place in 8 weeks on January 24th.
I think we'd still like to see if there would be a motion by any commission member on the initial complaint in this matter, the number 1.
755.
755, yes.
755.
Do you need to have them change the
No,
verification?
the First Amendment complaint is adequate. The first amended complaint,
Okay,
is
adequate.
adequate.
Okay, well, I would move to find probable cause in the First Amendment complaint.
755.
755.
Pardon me?
Did you second?
I would. I will. I did. I am.
The motion has been seconded to find probable cause in complaint number 7, amended complaint 755. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The motion passes. Returning to the agenda, all that remains now is to remind everyone that our next meeting will take place in 8 weeks on January 24th.
We'll talk about it.
Commissioner Hill, don't you need to set 755 for hearing at the?
Yes, yes, and we will, at that time, at that meeting, have a hearing in complaint 755. And are there any other matters that the commission needs to discuss before we adjourn?
Well, some of us are rolling off the end of January, and I likely will not be reappointed. So hope to see you all there.
You continue to serve until your replacement is appointed, and your term runs until February the 1st.
Right. Yes, so anyone who is replaced, the January meeting would be your last meeting, but we hope to see more of you though, so.
Absolutely.
So
Well,
I hope to get there and see a lot of you in person before I get kicked off.
I would enjoy it.
Yes.
Yes,
And
we'll
and
see
if
you.
that happens, you can always come with public comment.
Oh.
Like you need
We can
that.
cold call someone other than Josh.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, if there are no other matters to discuss, we will take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Very good.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any additional discussion? All in favor of approving the motion to adjourn signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The motion passes. Thank you, commissioners and staff, again for your participation today. Enjoy your holidays, and we'll see you in 8 weeks.
Everybody have a good holiday.
Thank you.
Enjoy the break, all.
Big Tim Brewers.
There's some good stuff.
Thank you all.